The whispering campsite. The sound came first. A faint, rhythmic pulse beneath the static, something barely there. Elias Turner leaned closer to the headphones, his fingers trembling slightly over the console. It was nothing more than a hum, a breath hidden under wind, yet his body recognized it before his mind did. A lullaby. The same one his mother used to hum in the tent, back when Cedar Hollow still existed, back when his sister Lila's laughter used to shake the canvas walls like soft thunder. He pulled the headphones off and sat still in the quiet apartment. The city outside murmured through double-glazed glass, a distant highway hiss. But beneath all that, the sound from his recorder clung to the air, like a memory refusing to fade. He found himself whispering, "That's not possible." But he already knew what it meant. He'd been recording forests for years, coastlines, canyons, rain on iron roofs, but this was the first time the forest had recorded him back. The next morning, he packed his gear without thinking. A duffel with microphones, a parabolic dish, extra batteries. He hadn't been to Cedar Hollow in decades, not since he was 12. But the route unfolded in his head with startling clarity. A narrow road north, then the turnoff past the sawmill that had probably rotted by now, and then the logging track that used to end at a hand-painted sign, Cedar Hollow Campground. He tried searching it online before leaving. No results. The map showed empty forest, a blank patch of green where childhood once lived. He closed the laptop. Some things you just had to see for yourself. The drive north took most of the day. The radio refused to hold a signal after the first mountain pass. Pines pressed close to the road, leaning in as if listening. At a gas station near the base of the hills, Elias asked the man behind the counter if Cedar Hollow still had a public access trail. The man looked up from his crossword, chewing on a pen. "Cedar Hollow? Can't say I've heard of it. You mean Hollow Creek? Folks fish up that way sometimes." Elias shook his head and pulled an old Polaroid from his wallet, a photograph he had carried since childhood, 2 kids by a fire pit, his sister grinning with a stick in her hand, marshmallow ablaze. Behind them, a carved cedar stump with E+L scratched into the bark. The man squinted at it. That stump burned down in a lightning fire back in '92. Whole ridge went with it. Elias tried to smile but couldn't. The photo suddenly felt heavier in his hand. He left the highway by sunset. The sky burned gold through the windshield, streaked with smoke-colored clouds. By the time the pavement ended, he was driving through memory alone, gravel popping under the tires, every bend familiar and alien all at once. He parked where the road dissolved into tall grass. Beyond that, a narrow trail led into the forest. He shouldered his pack and walked. The forest met him with silence, not the natural kind, but the kind that waits. Even his footsteps sounded wrong, muffled, absorbed by the ground. He followed the stream by instinct. It curved through the valley exactly as he remembered, the smell of wet cedar clinging to the air. Then, through the fading light, he saw it, the clearing, the fire ring, half buried in ash. The same stump, scarred but standing. For a moment he forgot to breathe. Time, it seemed, had spared this one place. He set up camp as the last light drained away. The routine steadied him. Tent, tripod, microphone aimed toward the trees. When the forest fell into full dark, he pressed record. The red light blinked softly like a heartbeat. Wind drifted through the pines, carrying a whisper of water from the stream. He sat by the cold fire ring, eyes half closed, listening. An owl called once, distant and uncertain. Then nothing. The silence grew so deep it felt alive. When he played the recording back hours later, there it was again. At first just wind, then faint laughter, then the lullaby, almost inaudible, woven into the rustle of branches. His chest tightened. He adjusted the gain, isolated the track, turned the volume up. 2 voices, his own young and bright, and hers, Lila. "Don't eat all the marshmallows, Eli," she laughed. His stomach dropped. He could remember the moment now, perfectly. She'd said that the night before the rain came, the last trip before everything changed. He stumbled out of the tent into the moonlight. The clearing looked untouched, but the air had thickened with scent, wet smoke, pine sap, something sweet and burnt. The fire ring glowed faintly as if the coals had just died. He crouched, touched the ash. Warm. When he looked up, the trees seemed closer than before. He switched his recorder back on and whispered, "Is anyone here?" Only the night replied, shifting softly around him. He slept little. Each dream came threaded with the sound of running water, of laughter behind it, always just out of reach. At dawn, the forest was pale and new. His tent was dusted with dew, his pack damp. He unzipped the flap, expecting nothing more than light or rain, but stopped. There were small footprints around the camp, bare feet, light enough to belong to a child. They circled the fire ring once, then vanished into the stream. He followed them until they dissolved into the current. By noon, he'd convinced himself it was imagination. Deer tracks, erosion, anything else. He packed his gear and checked his GPS to mark the coordinates, but the screen showed a blank grid, no data, no signal, just an empty space where he stood. He laughed once under his breath, a thin sound. "Of course," he said to no one. That night, he tried to recreate the lullaby humming into the mic, waiting for the forest to answer. When he stopped, another voice carried the final note, soft, familiar, almost kind. It wasn't frightening, not yet. It felt like the edge of remembering, like standing on the shore of a lake too dark to see across. Later, lying in his tent, Elias began to whisper into the recorder. "Cedar Hollow," he said, his voice barely audible under the hiss. "If anyone hears this, tell me I'm not the only one who remembers." He left the recorder running, its red light blinking against the nylon walls while the wind outside rose and fell like breath. Somewhere beyond the stream, a single voice hummed, low and clear, finishing the lullaby he could never quite forget. The river was louder in the mornings. Elias sat cross-legged at its edge, a microphone poised like an offering. The current whispered around the rocks, gentle but deliberate, carrying a rhythm that felt almost spoken. He'd been here 4 days now. The forest hadn't changed, but something inside it had begun to breathe with him. His sleep was shallow, laced with the same lullaby that threaded every recording. When he played the newest one back, he heard words beneath the water's rush, blurred and soft, like memory filtered through static. "She's still here," a voice murmured. Or maybe that was his own mind repeating what it wanted to believe. By noon, the forest had gone silent again. Not empty, but listening. Elias walked the perimeter of the clearing with his audio gear, marking coordinates in a notebook when the recorder picked up strange interference. Low rumbles, reversed echoes, half-formed syllables. He didn't know what he was mapping. Maybe time itself. He followed the anomalies downstream until the ground sloped toward a narrow basin, where the air felt thick enough to hold sound like fog. That's where he first saw her. She stood knee-deep in the shallows, wearing field gear, her hair tied back. When she turned, her expression was practical but wary, the look of someone who'd been caught trespassing in her own workplace. "You shouldn't be out here," she said. "The park's off limits this month. Restoration study." Elias almost laughed. "This isn't a park, it's Cedar Hollow." She frowned. "There's no such place." Her name was Maeve Kessler, a biologist from the regional preserve, tracking water acidity and salamander populations. She had maps, data, and a voice that refused superstition. When he told her about the whispers and the vanished campground, she shook her head. "This valley floods every few years. Maybe you found a washout that looks like an old campsite. Memory's tricky when you want something to be true." But that night, when they met again by accident near the stream, she admitted something. "Sometimes I hear things too," she said quietly. "Only when the sun goes down. Echoes that don't make sense." Her words trembled at the edges, like someone describing a dream before it disappears. They decided to record together, she with her environmental sensors, he with his microphones. At dusk, the forest filled with colorless light. The stream shimmered like quicksilver, smooth and cold. Maeve stood midstream, watching her instruments flicker. "It's reversing," she whispered. Elias leaned closer, unsure if she meant the data or the water. The current slowed until it stood still. For 3 long minutes, the flow changed direction, curling backward around the stones, dragging leaves upstream. The microphones caught everything, the sound of time folding, of breath inhaling after a long silence. Beneath it, laughter surfaced, faint, childlike, rising with the backward current. When the water resumed its normal flow, Maeve was shaking. "What did you just record?" Elias played it back. Between the ripples and wind, a voice called his name. Not the groan version. the name only his sister had used, Eli. He stared at the recorder as if it might bleed. Maeve looked pale but steady. "Maybe the forest isn't haunted," she said. "Maybe it's just remembering." Over the next days, they traced the anomalies through the woods. Every evening, new distortions appeared, echoes that bent in circles, phrases repeated from nowhere. Once, Elias woke to find his tent facing the opposite direction, his compass spinning uselessly in his hand. Maeve began to sketch the clearing, though she swore she'd drawn it before. "This feels familiar," she murmured one night, her pencil trembling. "But I've never been here." He found a photograph half buried near the fire pit, near himself and Lila again, but older, 15 maybe, years past the age she'd died. They stood in front of a tent that hadn't existed when they were children. The background was identical to his current camp. When he showed it to Maeve, she only said, "The forest must keep its own version of you." She started dreaming of a little girl by the river, humming the same tune. "I can never see her face," she whispered over coffee boiled black on the fire, "but I know she's watching me." Elias's notebooks began to contradict themselves. Same entries, same dates, written twice in different handwriting. His recordings sometimes included his own voice, responding to questions he hadn't asked yet. The distinction between past and present grew soft, like paper left in the rain. One night he heard two people talking just outside the tent. One was Maeve, the other himself, but their words were impossible. A conversation about leaving, about staying, about something finished. He stumbled outside with his flashlight, but the clearing was empty. The trees glistened with dew, though no rain had fallen. When he returned to his tent, Maeve's sleeping bag was gone. Morning came cold. Her notebook lay open on a rock near the fire ring, pages fluttering in the breeze. The last entry was written in a rushed hand. "She asked if I could remember her name. I couldn't." The forest was utterly still. Elias walked to the river's edge, calling for her until his throat cracked. No answer, just the water flowing slow, steady, almost mechanical in its repetition. He followed it downstream for hours until the trees closed tighter and light thinned into green mist. That's where he found it, half buried under wet leaves, its metal casing eaten by rust. A field recorder, the same model as his, initials scratched faintly on the side, ET. He brushed away the dirt and flipped the switch. The tiny screen blinked once, alive against all odds. One file remained, labeled in faded text, "Play me when you're ready." Elias sat by the river and stared at it until dusk. The forest seemed to wait with him, patient and infinite. When he finally lifted the recorder to his ear, he didn't press play. He just whispered, "Not yet," and the trees swayed gently as if nodding their approval. The sun dropped below the ridge, and the stream caught the last of the light, burning gold in reverse, flowing softly toward the mountains it had come from. Somewhere behind him, a voice like his own breathed the same words a second later, overlapping perfectly as though the forest had already heard him say them once before. Morning rose colorless, as if the sun had forgotten its lines. Elias sat beside the river, the old recorder in his hands, dew shining on the metal like frost. He hadn't slept. The forest no longer felt like a place he was visiting, but a body he'd somehow entered. Every breath matched its pulse. Every sound folded into another. When he finally pressed play, a hiss bloomed from the speaker. Then his own voice emerged. Older, slower, trembling with wear. "If you're hearing this," it said, "then the forest has already chosen you. Every sound is a story that never ended. Every silence, something left unsaid. Follow the lullaby upstream." The message ended with static that almost sounded like breathing. He rose and obeyed. The trail was gone, replaced by a thin ribbon of mist curling between trees. The further he walked, the younger everything became. Saplings where the old cedars should be, stones smooth and wet as though just born. Time loosened its grip. The forest exhaled him forward. Around midday, he found Maeve's flashlight half submerged in mud, its beam still faintly blinking, though the batteries were wrong for the model. He pocketed it and kept climbing along the stream. The water grew quieter until it was nearly silent, the surface slick as glass. When he looked down, the reflection staring back wasn't his own face, but a child's, wide-eyed, frightened, waiting. Memory cracked open. The final trip. Lila near the riverbank, chasing her paper boat. The way he'd looked away to record the frogs, thinking she was safe. The splash that came a moment too late. The silence that followed. Their parents had never spoken of it again. They'd said she wandered off. They'd searched for days. But he remembered now. The weight of her hand slipping from his. The rush of water closing over her voice. His body folded under the memory. Knees to the moss. Breath caught in his throat. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though the forest already knew. When he looked up, the world had changed again. The clearing shimmered through the trees, the same campsite but layered over itself, decades stacked like thin film. He saw tents of canvas and nylon fading in and out, firelight blooming and vanishing. Figures moved within the overlap. His parents by a flame, Maeve crouched at the river, children laughing at nothing. The air hummed with voices, hundreds of them, all speaking fragments of their own lost moments. The forest wasn't haunted, it was full. He walked through the mirage, touching nothing. The lullaby threaded through the noise, clearer than ever. He followed it to the cedar stump where E+L was carved, though the letters now looked freshly cut. Beside it lay his modern recorder, red light blinking, still running from the night before. The two machines, old and new, echoed each other's static in perfect sync, a loop with no beginning. The whispers gathered, rising like wind through needles, shaping words that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Don't let her fade again. Elias understood then. The hollow didn't trap the lost, it preserved them as long as someone remembered. Every visitor who carried grief became a caretaker of sound, feeding the archive with love, regret, apology. Maeve hadn't disappeared. She'd been absorbed, her voice now woven into the chorus. And if he left, Lila's laughter would finally sink beneath the current, erased as the river righted itself. He lifted the newer recorder, thumb poised over erase. "You deserve peace," he said softly, "even if that means forgetting." But his hand wouldn't move. The forest waited. He realized that letting go wasn't silence, it was continuation. So he set both recorders by the riverbank, pressed record on each, and began to speak. Not into the machines, but into the trees, into the air, into everything that might still be listening. He told the story exactly as it had happened. The campsite, the laughter, the loss, the years of running from sound. When his voice finally broke, he whispered the lullaby's last line, the one his mother used to hum when storms came. "Sleep now, little one, the water will keep you warm." Then he turned away. The forest seemed to sigh, long and low, like relief. Behind him, the recorders kept blinking, capturing wind, water, birds returning to song. The current no longer ran backward. It carried his words downstream, scattering them like seeds. By dusk, he reached the ridge. The valley below shimmered as if submerged, then steadied into ordinary wilderness. No clearing, no carved stump, just trees stretching endless and still. He looked back once and thought he heard a girl's laughter ripple through the pines. But maybe it was only the breeze. Years later, a hiker found the place by chance. No map marked it, yet she knew she'd arrived somewhere meant to be remembered. In the moss lay two recorders fused by rust. She pressed one, it whirred to life, capturing the quiet of her own breath. For a moment there was only static, then a voice beneath it, faint and distant, humming a lullaby that made the whole forest lean in to listen. And the river kept flowing softly as though it were still learning the tune. Thank you for making it to the end. I hope you enjoyed this one. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day.